All right, so without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome again to the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit in the Parks Technical Assistance Center. This presentation is entitled Alternative Fuels Cost Benefit Analysis Training. Your presenters today are Steve Reich and Cicinio Conkas. Steve Reich is a program director for the Transportation Program and Evaluation Economics Analysis team at the University of South Florida's Center for Urban Transportation Research. His area of expertise includes transportation agency management, innovative financing, capital programming, federal aid, toll facility management, and operations. He has made significant research contributions locally and nationally studying tolls, highway, aviation, transit, alternative fuels, and metropolitan planning organizations. Cicinio Conkas is a transportation economist with broad expertise in urban and regional economic impact analysis with proven skills in ergometric model building applied to transportation policy analysis. He currently serves as a senior research associate at the University of South Florida Center for Urban Transportation Research. His research interests include study in the linkage between transportation infrastructure investment and economic development, the applied and non-parametric estimating and interface techniques to transportation research, and the theoretical underpinning of the linkage between household activity travel patterns and land use in urban areas. He has also conducted research on the evaluation of alternative fueled options for public transportation and is the developer for the Buffett model, which stands for Bus Fuel Fleet Evaluation Tool. So without any further ado, I'll hand over the presentation to Steve Reich.
Greetings from sunny and warm Tampa. Thank you for that introduction, Amber. And today's webinar is going to be essentially broken up into two sections. I'm going to take the first section and just walk you through some of the background of alternative fuels, how we developed some of the data that was used, talk about some of the pros and cons of the various fuels, particularly for use in large buses. And then the second section will actually be Cicinio Conkas, my colleague, walking you through a couple of examples of how the model will work.
All right, and I know Steve has a couple of questions for you first, so we will ask you your first polling question. Are you currently operating any alternative fuel transit vehicles? And I'll just keep the poll open another few seconds. All right, it looks like quite a few of you are not operating a vehicle as of yet, but we do have a few that are, so that's fantastic. That'll help our instructors. And my next question for you is, how many alternative fueled vehicles do you currently operate for those of you who are operating them? All right, it looks like, of course, those who don't have vehicles indicated 0, but there are at least one of you who are operating, many of them, 7 or more, and at least one that's operating 1 or 2. So fantastic. And my last question for you, what type of alternative fuel vehicles are you currently using for those of you who are using them? Okay, great. It looks like the majority of folks are, or actually it's split equal, biodiesel and electric. So fantastic. Thank you for those, and we will continue on with the presentation. All right. We do have one last question for you. For those of you who are operating alt fuels vehicles, if you can use the Q&A drop-down manager and type in for me what vehicles you're currently operating, that would be great. All right, thank you, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you again for sharing the results of our polling questions. And I'd like to get started here with just giving an overview of the different fuels that we have analyzed for use in transportation, and then get into a little bit of the overview of how this cost analysis will work. As transportation people, why should we be concerned with alternative fuels? It sounds like a pretty obvious question with obvious answers, but just to put it into perspective, when you look at industrial, residential, commercial, and the transportation sectors of our economy, transportation makes up almost 3/4 of the demand for oil in the United States today, and I think it's pretty well known that we're importing well over half, and have been for over a decade, importing over half of the oil that's required for our domestic demand. I think we're pretty aware of the environmental issues associated, particularly greenhouse gases and other regulated emissions. And the fact that we run this transportation system in this country based on a finite resource, we need to keep striving to find cost-effective and more environmentally friendly fuels to fuel our system. So as we think about trying to help you decide what may be the most appropriate alternative fuel for your fleet that you're running at your parks or at your facilities, this model that we're going to talk about today is really a decision support tool. It's not going to tell you the answer, because there are lots of considerations that have to go into this decision making. First of all would be, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to demonstrate that your agency is working towards energy independence? Are you at a park where noise or air quality issues or groundwater issues are what you're trying to deal with? Is the fuel even available in an economic manner in your region of the country? If you bought some new whiz-bang sort of vehicle, are you going to have the technical support to service these vehicles because of their maintenance? Some fuels are far more appropriate for warmer weather climates and experience some difficulties in the colder weather. If you're having to turn your fleet pretty quickly and it's in constant use, some of the fuels require significantly longer fueling times than the traditional diesel or gasoline. Same thing with vehicle range. And as you move away from the traditional fuels and get into some of the more exotics, I'll call them, there may be, and you have your own maintenance facility, there'll probably be requirements to retrofit from a safety standpoint, even some of those fire suppression systems and air handling systems in your maintenance facility. And then, of course, there is the issue of cost. The top bullet and the bottom bullet, at a minimum, are considered in this model as a way to try and help you guide you towards your decision as to what alternative fuel vehicle you may want to purchase. I'm going to try to quickly go through this set of fuels, and what we've developed is a fairly simple, it's almost like a Siskel and Ebert thumbs up and thumbs down approach to the pros and cons of the different fuels. And we'll talk about electric, although not technically a fuel. We put that in there as well because of the use of electric vehicles and their up-and-coming use as well. So sort of as a baseline, we'll use gasoline and diesel as our base, where because of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, NOx, volatile organic compounds, and so forth, we give them a thumbs down for emissions. supply, that's not intended to mean how much of it there is in the globe, or what the world supply is it fairly easily accessible in the U.S. market. Cost, safety, delivery, that is a little bit different if you're talking about, again, some of the exotics of hydrogen, or even natural gas if you're not near a natural gas pipeline. And then the energy content, which is just basically measured off the gasoline diesel base of the BTUs per gallon, because the lower that number is, the more of it you will need to generate the same energy. Conversely, the higher that value is, the less of it you will need. So let's start with biodiesel. And we refer to biodiesel and ethanol and these biofuels as really sort of transitional fuels to take us to our energy future. And I noticed that several of you are using biodiesel, but for those of you who are not using it, it does have some very beneficial air quality attributes. But I want to say here, what biodiesel is not just yellow grease from the McDonald's down the street, or from the restaurant that you may have in your park. There's an ASTM standard for biodiesel, and although there are hobbyists and there are people who deal with running vehicles on straight yellow grease, restaurant greases can be used as an input to make biodiesel. But in terms of the reliability of your engines and so forth, we recommend that you use certified ASTM biodiesel. Now we'll talk a little bit about combustion ignition engines and spark ignition engines, and very, very basically, spark ignition engines are like a gasoline engine with a spark plug. Combustion ignition engines are like diesel engines that do not require a spark plug, but the combustion itself ignites the next cycle. Again, the main feedstocks of the biodiesel in the U.S. these days is soybean, but it can be made from waste products, from canola, peanuts, cottonseed, many different inputs. And we'll talk about this with ethanol as well. The controversy over the biofuels when food stocks are being used as inputs can be fairly controversial and a legitimate concern for people using these. You can use it, biodiesel, at 100% blend. That's called B100. The most common use is a 20% biodiesel, 80% diesel blend called B20. You can find commercially available blends from B2, B5, all the way to B100. So, pros and cons. You can use biodiesel without virtually any modification if you're using it in the B20 blend. There are more and more production facilities that are creating and blending this stuff all over the United States. With the new sulfur standards for diesel, the ultra-low sulfur diesel, it could actually help in one of the drawbacks of the new diesel fuel in terms of adding some lubricity to the engine so the engine doesn't wear out. As I said earlier, it has some fairly decent air quality emissions profiles. Now, on the downside, if you live in or if you're operating in an extremely cold climate, there can be issues with the gel point of biodiesel, particularly in the higher blends like a B100. You can also it can also have an impact on the rubber bits and seals and so forth in your fueling infrastructure and in your vehicles if they're old. But again, that's particularly if you're using it at a 100% blend or 100% at B100. It has some properties that has a tendency to sort of act as a solvent on rubber and that sort of thing. But again, at a B20 blend, you can You can use it out of your existing diesel tanks and your diesel fueling system if it's available. If there's a supply issue or a cost issue, you can switch back to diesel. And again, that's only true at the B20 level. We give it a thumbs up for emissions, neutral on supplying cost. As we watch the cost of biodiesel, again, depending on the area of the country you're in, it can actually run lower than regular diesel, ultra-low sulfur diesel, or can run a little higher depending on local markets. It's relatively the same in terms of energy content, and since its delivery and safety, we give it the thumbs up. When I say delivery here for biodiesel, the stuff actually requires no additional refining or anything. If someone locally is producing ASTM standard biodiesel, they could just what they call splash blend it in a tanker truck, and it actually just mixes up. They mix it up in the truck on its way to deliver to your facility. It is non-toxic and biodegradable, and you can see some of the statistics there that I've put on the slide in terms of what EPA has found and what DOE has found. Particularly the carbon dioxide emissions are a real plus with biodiesel. And again, it's readily available, easy to implement, particularly at the B20 blend. Amber helped me look around and see who all out there in the federal land management areas were using biodiesels, and there may be others, but we certainly found that on this webinar there are 2 of you, and here's a list of some others. Some of these places I'm very familiar with and very fond of. Now, ethanol. A lot of news these days about ethanol. Well, what is it? It's essentially alcohol. It's moonshine, essentially. It's fermented from virtually anything that grows. Unfortunately, most of the ethanol being produced in the United States is coming from corn, and there's this competition for land and fertilizer and agriculture capacity. A couple of years, I guess 2 years ago, there was actually a run-up in food costs because of a shift of agriculture production for the use of ethanol. Ethanol is used in the spark ignition engine, and again, this is the typical, and it would be in your automobile. It uses a spark plug. And it's been around as a fuel for a very long time. Goes back early in the last century, but I guess in the 70s, those of you who are an old guy like me remember gasohol, which was a blend of 10% ethanol, 90% gasoline, and in the oil embargoes and shortages of the 70s, this became a pretty popular fuel, particularly in the Midwest. What you see out there now, and you see a lot more of it being advertised, is E85, which is only 15% gasoline and 85% ethanol. This cannot be used in an engine that has not been designed to use it, and it can be used in biofuel vehicles that are designed to use this, and there are many more vehicles being produced, particularly light-duty vehicles are being produced that use this. Well, the advantages of ethanol, we're going to talk about methanol, which is another kind of alcohol in a second. While it does have, ethanol has lower energy density than gasoline, it is higher than the other alcohols. It can come from renewable feedstocks. It can be made from waste grass clippings. It can be made from waste food products, anything that you could distill. It is water soluble, and it has been being introduced into fuels, particularly in air quality non-attainment areas, where they have to add oxygenators to the fuels. ETBEs have replaced MBTEs because of methanol's really toxic nature and the issue of leaking underground storage tanks and that methanol getting into the groundwater. Ethanol has taken over even an additive. Now, most vehicles on the road today that have been built since the 80s can use up to a 10% blend of ethanol. But again, this E85 that's being promoted around the country, which is 85% ethanol, requires a flex fuel vehicle. And at last check, there were, as you can see on the slide, over 6 million of them. Again, the downside, I think we talked about, depending on the feedstock in the market for what's being used to make the fuel, it can be more costly, particularly without subsidies. We get into this competition by using food stocks as inputs. It does not have a terrific nitrous oxide emission profile, and as I said, it's about 30%, has about 30% less energy content per gallon than a gallon of gasoline or diesel. It does, because it's so highly oxygenated, it does have a terrific impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And although, I mean, there's lots of debate on ethanol, and there are some scientists that have shown that it requires more energy input than what you get out. There is CO2 that is released as you distill whatever you're doing to make the alcohol. The counter argument to that is that because it's being made from crops, the typical CO2 cycle takes care of that, and there's no new CO2 being introduced into the atmosphere. So we give it a thumbs up for emissions, neutral on supply. Cost, we give it a thumbs down as it relates to gasoline, because typically it does run a few cents, and when you combine that with the fact that you need about 30% more of it to run, you see the energy content with the red arrow pointing down. Those are the two negatives. Again, there's no issues, particularly at lower concentrations of delivery or fueling infrastructure or that sort of thing. We've found that Mammoth Cave are using ethanol in their fleet vehicles, and I think that may be the only one. Now, what we are beginning to see, we'll talk about hybrid electric vehicles in a few minutes. We are beginning to see the use of E85 in engines that are used in hybrid electric buses, particularly in the heavy-duty large buses. Methanol I won't spend a lot of time on. This was once thought to be a viable transportation fuel. It is some very nasty stuff from a handling and an environmental standpoint. But it's alcohol that's made from the distillation of wood. Now there are some small scale demonstrations in the U.S. where methane from landfills is being captured to produce this as a fuel, and that's pretty laudable. But on any wholesale level, people have pretty much, for the time being, given up on methanol as a viable transport fuel. Again, because it comes from wood, it is the feedstock, the stuff that's used to make it, is pretty available. From a cleanup standpoint, it is water soluble. Its energy content is extremely low, about half of that of gasoline. When it burns, you can't see the flame, which creates a safety issue. Used neat or at 100% or M100, there can be issues with cold starting. And probably one of the more nasty things about it is the byproduct of burning it is formaldehyde. So, well, because of, let's back up here 1 second. Because of the low sulfur and low NOx, we've given it a thumbs up for emissions, but on energy content, safety, because of the invisible flame issue and also the toxicity level of the stuff, we've given a fairly negative rating. And again, it's not particularly relevant in that not many folks are using this anymore as a transportation fuel. Excuse me 1 second. I'm battling a cold here, and I don't want to cough in everyone's ear.
And while Steve is doing that, I just wanted to mention that one of the reasons that we're illustrating for you which parks are utilizing which fuels is so that you have a resource to get in touch with some of these folks if you're interested in asking them any questions about the resources that they're utilizing. And this information, of course, is available in the PowerPoint presentation, which you can access through the handout section, but there's also an Excel file there as well to provide you some list detailed information as well as some contact information. So, Steve?
Thank you, Amber. I'm going to move into the gases now and talk about LPG for a few minutes. I guess the most common form of this is propane. And believe it or not, this is the largest, the most extensively used alternative fuel in the United States. It has relatively low CO2 emission profile. There are some drawbacks to it. And in places where you know that it's an excellent mobility fuel, because if you think about where vehicles are needed inside a confined area, typically you've seen the forklifts running around in factories for years run on this fuel for that very reason. There's a lot of it produced here in the U.S. It doesn't require being stored under excessive pressures. It does require special fueling infrastructure. So where it is used, it's mainly a fleet kind of a fuel, which would be relevant for you all, where there's centralized fueling facilities. But there are some downsides to it, including its energy content is lower and requires more fuel to go an equal distance. So on the rating scale, again, the LPG, depending on what part of the country you're in, from a supply standpoint, you may or may not be able to get it. And to run a vehicle fleet, you need more than the 10-gallon or 20-gallon containers you use for your barbecue. But it does have a really nice emission profile, relatively less expensive than gasoline or diesel. And as I said earlier, the energy content is probably its biggest drawback. Again, Acadia, Zion, and Mammoth, if you're interested in talking to folks that are using this and to get their experiences, as Amber said earlier, there's a resource available in the handouts that gives you the contact information. Now, as I said in the very beginning of the presentation, that we were going to talk about electric. It's not technically a fuel, it's an energy delivery method. And when you think about electricity and you think about its pros and cons from an environmental standpoint and that sort of thing, you've got to think about the wells to wheels or the whole energy chain concept. If the electricity that's being generated is coming from some high sulfur coal from an antiquated power plant, then while locally you may be gaining in terms of the air quality issues, the point of generation may be a pretty nasty thing. Even with the amazing advances in battery technologies, it continues to be a fairly poor transportation source of energy, because the batteries weigh so much, and of course in transportation you've got to drag around the energy source with you, unless you're getting the electricity from a catenary on a light rail system or that sort of thing. Now we're seeing the growth in both the light vehicle market and in the heavy fuel market in hybrid electrics, and I know you've probably seen a lot in terms of the plug-in electric for the light-duty vehicles, most notably the Chevy Volt, which there's a huge advertising campaign going on now. There are plug-in hybrid electric buses being developed and have been deployed. I'm not aware of any in the U.S. yet, but in Asia they are coming on over there. Without getting into a technical discussion about the different kinds of hybrid electric drives, I'm going to talk about a very simple one called the series system, which seems to be where for a heavy-duty bus. When I say heavy-duty bus, I'm talking about the 25 to 40-foot buses that would be used in to carry anywhere from 20 to 40 people. They're really moving away from the really complicated systems that you see in the Toyota Prius, Honda Civic, and more toward a very straightforward kind of a system, which I have a slide here, which basically what you have is an electric bus. The bus is driven off of a giant electric motor. And then the engine just turns the generator, which replenishes the battery or gives direct power to the motor if it needs it. Of course, there's sophisticated regenerative braking systems and lightweight materials and those sorts of things that go on into these buses that help extend their range. But generally, that's the way it works. Engine, which can be fueled by gasoline, diesel, E85, hydrogen, runs a generator. Generator creates electricity, runs the electric motor, and stores energy in the batteries for when more energy is needed to go up a hill or whatever. When we look at buses, now that's not to say that there aren't pure electric vehicles out there, and there haven't been plenty of demonstrations of the use of them. Excellent vehicle to be used where noise is a consideration, and you don't want that in a park or some environment where you're very sensitive to the noise that one of these big buses can put off. But because the battery technology hasn't advanced to the point where you can get the range out of these things, pure electric buses in a lot of applications have been waning. This is, again, one of those things where you have to think about the operating environment that you're in. If you're running these vehicles in the Everglades where it's flat and there's no hills, you could get a lot more range out of them than if you were trying to move through going to the Sun Road up and down the mountains in Glacier. You wouldn't get very much range out of an electric bus. So what has evolved are the hybrid electric buses. And as I say, any kind of an engine can run these. So we see CNG engines running them, even hydrogen internal combustion engines, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. That's not a fuel cell. It's actually using hydrogen in a liquid form in a traditional kind of an engine. The huge advantage to it being the air quality benefits of using hydrogen as a fuel. But even in the urban bus settings, we're seeing E85 being used to, again, power an engine that runs a generator, to propel electric engine to move the bus, and CNG. Now, I mentioned fuel cell, and fuel cell has sort of been the holy grail of transportation technologies, and I've been involved in this for several decades, and it always seems to be just out of reach. It's another 10 or 15 years shy of commercial viability. But what the fuel cell is it's essentially a battery that you add fuel to. The reason that the hydrogen fuel cell is such an attractive potential source is that water and heat are the only byproducts aside from the electricity that you're getting if hydrogen is used in a fuel cell. Now, it's not a new technology. As you can see, it was invented in the 1800s. Other fuels can be used, but again, the holy grail has been the hydrogen fuel cell because of the only byproduct besides the energy that you get is water and heat. Extremely expensive. Still not sure of the life cycles of these things. So lumping all the electric together, we'll say on the plus side, there's no tailpipe emission if it's a pure electric bus, and even if it's a plug-in hybrid vehicle, agencies and individuals will be able to soon take advantage of charging these things off peak when smart grid technologies come to the country universally. And in fact, you'd be able to sell energy back to the grid at peak times if your vehicle were to be plugged in. But electricity in general, I think one of its biggest pluses as a transportation energy source is the fact that you can invest in the air quality mitigation technologies at a power plant at a much heavier rate than trying to do this with millions of vehicles moving along the highways. You can spread the investment over the lifetime of a power plant as opposed to investing in something on vehicles that are only going to last 10 or 15 years. Again, the downsides, we've talked about the range. Because of the sophisticated regenerative braking in batteries and other materials, they can cost a lot. And in our example, you'll see what a full-size bus cost differential is for a hybrid electric versus a traditional a traditional diesel-powered bus. So the only energy source that we give 2 thumbs up for emissions and supply, again, cost. We're doing some more. My colleague Cecilio and I are actually doing some more research now on the relative cost kilowatt hours energy equivalent to how much traditional fuels cost. But we give it a thumbs down on energy content mainly because of the battery capacities and the range. Those using electric vehicles that we were able to find are listed in the slide. And again, for a lighter duty vehicle, fine. Not having to run up and down mountains, that's a great thing. And again, if you don't have to run a service 24/7 and the vehicle can remain parked overnight to be recharged, that's a really good thing. I think we have a question.
We do. Before we move on to the next fuel, somebody actually had a question about LPG or liquefied petroleum gas. They were indicating that Bryce Canyon considered this technology in the past and was very concerned regarding high altitude performance. Could you make comment on this? As far as an elevation, theirs was 6,200 to 9,200 feet.
Well, I think that any of the gases that need to be stored at high pressures, and I'm guessing that if you had access to the service folks that could tune and dial the engine in, you might be able to pull that off. But that would be a concern, I would think, with any of the compressed gases if you were using them at extreme altitude. That's not something, frankly, that we've looked into a lot, but the literature would suggest that there are those issues. So maybe in my slide about considerations, aside from climate and operating characteristics, we need to put that in there as well, and I appreciate that question. Speaking of gases, natural gas, I think may be aside from hydrogen, will be the last fuels we talk about. Widely used through the U.S. for not only home heating, but also for the generation of electricity. And significant portion of all U.S. energy demand is met by the use of natural gas. For transportation, we think of it and deal with it in two forms, compressed and liquefied. And I say plentiful supplies. There are plentiful supplies in the U.S., but they're not without their issues as well. And there's been a lot of recent publicity and controversy over some of the practices for extraction that are being used, particularly the practice of fracking and what that can do to groundwater and drinking supplies. But dealing with it in a compressed state, which it is compressed to several thousand pounds per square inch, we get a huge reduction in carbon monoxide versus diesel or gasoline, and NOx. It can be used in a bi-fuel environment. This is used in CNG is used in a spark ignition engine. Again, so you could have a vehicle that ran on E85 and CNG. It could switch back and forth if you ran out of CNG and you had a backup fuel supply. Those of you who have been around any of this, you know what these things look like or seen them. I mean, they're huge tanks. Typically, are installed on the roof of the vehicle. And one of the two major drawbacks is if the fuel is vented somehow during fueling, it escapes. There are greenhouse gas emissions that are far worse than probably just using a traditional diesel bus, depending on how much of this stuff you vent into the atmosphere. And it does take quite a long time, depending again on what the size of your tanks are. But compared to diesel or gasoline or a liquefied fuel, it does take quite a long time for it to refuel. And of course, there's energy that's used to compress this stuff, even at a fueling station, which has to be considered in terms of cost and environmental consequences. So because of its emissions and its relative cost stability and equivalent to diesel and gasoline, we give it 3 thumbs up, a neutral on safety, and say delivery and energy content, because again, per gallon equivalent, the BTUs just aren't there. Yeah, I have to say, from an energy content standpoint, diesel fuel is almost the perfect transportation fuel because of its BTU content per gallon. There's obvious drawbacks, particulate matter when it's burned, and the other regulated emissions. But in terms of energy in a package, it's really hard to beat. It's even 30% more energy content in diesel fuel than there is in gasoline. And I should have mentioned that early on. And we give it a thumbs down for delivery, but again, that's very specific to where you are in the country. If you're on near a distribution pipeline, that can make all the difference in the world as to what sort of fueling infrastructure you're going to need and how much this fuel is going to cost you to run your fleet. You can see that Grand Canyon and Lake Mead and others are using CNG. It's pretty much proven of technology in the large vehicle market, and there are some maintenance savings in terms of because it is cleaner. How many times you have to change, at what frequency you have to change oil, and that sort of thing. It can be a big plus. LNG, which is the natural gas used in its liquefied form, has all the benefits of CNG, Plus, you can get better range because you're not. The downside. Let me just back up a second. The downside is you've got to keep it at the temperatures you see there on the slide in order to keep it in its liquefied form. So there's a trade-off between the energy that you can put on a bus in its liquefied form and the hassle and the logistics around keeping it so cold. That's how you get the range. The CNG, you have to compress it and keep taking time to force that gas into that cylinder to get up to around 4,000 psi. But again, you have the same issues of if it vents into the atmosphere during fueling or maintenance of a bus, it has some serious greenhouse gas issues. So again, same sort of pluses and minuses for LNG as CNG. It's not nearly as popular because of handling this stuff at such low temperatures as CNG. And the last fuel I'd like to mention is hydrogen. As we were talking about electricity as an energy delivery medium. We talked about hydrogen being used directly as a liquid, or could be used as a fuel cell to generate electricity. It comes from the most abundant element on Earth. You can get into some environmental issues depending on how you produce it. Most of the hydrogen that's being used in the United States in a commercial application is being done through the steam reformulation of natural gas. And there is quite a bit of CO2 that can be associated with that production. Hydrogen can be made through electrolysis, where you use electricity and water, separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, capture the hydrogen. Still very expensive in terms of the energy that it takes to get that pure hydrogen out of the water. There's a lot of investment, although not as much as I'd like to see by the original equipment manufacturers in trying to bring this to commercial application and fruition. I think we talked about the pluses and minuses. We talked about the pluses. Probably one of the two biggest drawbacks at this point is the lack of a distribution system for it. You can't just stick it in a pipeline after you send through a batch of diesel fuel. You can produce it on site, and we've seen that. We've seen that out in at Sunline Transit out in Palm Springs, California, where they, through solar photovoltaic cells, they actually produce some of their own there from solar energy. And we've seen in Oakland them produce it through that steam reformulation of natural gas, and then compress it themselves there, and they're running in Oakland 3 full-size hydrogen fuel cell buses as part of a FTA and National Renewable Energy Laboratory demonstration project. Super emissions supply, again, it's very tough to get. The current cost per gallon equivalent is probably on the order of $12 to $15 per gallon equivalent. Do we have a technical issue? Okay. And again, on a per gallon equivalency basis, we give it a thumbs down. This vehicle in Hawaii, I'm guessing, is a hydrogen internal combustion fueled van and not a hydrogen fuel cell van. And here, hydrogen is used as a fuel, just like gasoline, in a what would look like a typical kind of an engine, with all the benefits of the hydrogen, and not really anywhere close to the expense of a fuel cell. So thinking about the future, I wish I would have, this were my original quote, but in terms of trying to reduce our dependence on oil as the sole transportation fuel, from an environmental standpoint and an energy security standpoint, I think there isn't a single strategy that's going to take us there. I think it's not a silver bullet, but it's more like silver birdshot. As I said in the beginning, with transport using almost 72% of all the petroleum in the U.S., that's not a sustainable future. And we do have alternatives that are available today. Particularly the transitional fuels that we mentioned in the beginning of biodiesel and ethanol. For you all, in terms of thinking about it, it's a little easier for fleet managers to be on the leading edge because some of the fuels require an investment and know-how in the fueling infrastructure. So a centralized fleet with people that are technically competent and trained to deal with these vehicles make them a lot easier than the average one or two vehicle kind of either individual or organization. In terms of what we need to do as a country, and I may be getting a little bit off point here, I think that increasing the use of public transportation and more aggressive fuel efficiency standards, which have begun to be implemented, will help us get there. With all that as background, I just want to spend just a few minutes to wrap up this part of the presentation and introduce you to the model. As I said in the beginning, what we have here is a tool called, if you're from most of the country, you would call it Buffet. But if you're from Baltimore, like me, you would call it Buffett. Or from Key West, perhaps you would call it Buffett. But what we try to do is develop a tool to help fleet managers and agencies answer the question, either for themselves or for their board or for their stakeholders, what would be the cost and what would be the impact of implementing these alternative fuels, notwithstanding all those other issues we talked about before, your operating environment, your climate. We were trying to get at the total annualized cost and the total social annualized cost. We talked about the advantages of the emission profiles of some of these. What does that translate into in terms of societal savings over the useful life of a bus? So these were the two main things we were trying to get at. One, I need to thank the Florida Department of Transportation for actually funding us to create this model, and we're in the process of gathering new data to try and keep it up to date. But one of their concerns was that transit agencies, typically run by a board of citizen volunteers, while well-intentioned, will read an article about a bus that runs off of Chicken-Guana and want to know why their agency isn't implementing these environmentally sensitive things. And so it was a way to try and, at least for this part of the decision, to come at it from an objective manner and give people some factual basis from a cost and from a agency cost and a societal cost of what the pros and cons would be. So it required lots of cost data that we needed to put in there, because if you're evaluating this for the first time, you're not going to know what the operating cost of a diesel hybrid electric is versus. So what we did was inventoried many urban transit agencies, since they had the largest fleets around the country, in order to try and get this information. The acquisition costs, the capital costs, then what does it cost to run these vehicles? And you see the list of what we were able to collect: the life-to-date labor, parts, and fuel costs for as many different alternatively fueled buses that we could get a hold of. We also were grappling with the infrastructure costs. You see a list of things here that can be captured. Most of them can be captured and are captured in the model. Some of them you just have to think about as well. Facility retrofits. We toured the maintenance facility out in Oakland, California, where they were doing this hydrogen demonstration. And it was extraordinary what they needed to put in place to be able to service these vehicles in an enclosed area. Well, we've tried to capture this so that if you want to evaluate CNG, for example, that cost will be captured in the model as my colleague Cecilia goes through it for you in a few minutes. These were the agencies that responded to our survey. We were able to get data, that cost data that I mentioned, on a fleet of nearly 5,000 vehicles. You can see the mix of them here on this chart. Many CNG buses, and because this was done, the survey and the data collection was done some 24 months ago, there weren't as many hybrid electrics in there as we hoped to find. I can say that we're constantly trying to update this model and collect operating data, and so that we can provide default values that are meaningful. This is what on that sample fleet that underpins the cost model. You can see the kind of data that we got here. These are operating costs per mile for labor and parts. So on the far left, you see ultra-low sulfur diesel, 19 cents per mile in labor, 11 cents per mile in parts, CNG, LNG, etc. And again, the biodiesel hybrids, very few samples, pretty new technology at the time. We need to keep updating and gathering new data as people get more experience. Now, for a large bus, just a couple of quick data points here and trends. Our average large bus, you can see that the hybrid electric biodiesel is the line up top, which is expressed in miles per gallon. And while that's getting marginally better, you can also see what's happening to the traditional diesel bus, and nationally that number is probably right at about 5 miles per gallon now of diesel fuel, and that has to do with technological improvements that the industry is making. Pardon me. Also, you can see that the hybrid electric, when they first came into circulation, it was a bleeding edge and not a leading edge technology. So the operating costs were fairly significant. But as the technology matures and people become more comfortable with it, and the training of technicians becomes just a normal part of fleet management, you can see what's happened to those operating costs, and they've almost met by 2007. They almost were equal. So I'm going to take a break. Stop coughing in your ear, and at this juncture, I guess take any questions, Amber.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, you can use the Q&A drop-down manager to type in your question, or if you would like to ask it verbally, you can press *8 on your telephone keypad, and I will bring up the instructions on how to do that as well in case you're interested in asking your question via the telephone. It looks like we have one question so far. However, I think your second chart may have demonstrated it, and it was how do the operating costs on the previous chart compare to the conventional gasoline diesel platform? And I think
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, the two bars on the far left of the x-axis represent a traditional diesel bus. So you can see, and that ULSD stands for ultra low sulfur diesel. That's what that's there for. Now, since the large the very large, heavy-duty buses typically are not fueled with gasoline, although we are seeing gasoline hybrids, which are indicated here. Again, the labor and parts combined are 19 and 11 cents per mile. So what is that, 30 cents? Versus CNG for this fleet was 26 cents if you combine the blue and the red bars. And you can see the LNG. LPG, we did not get sufficient data to be able to report on that, and you can see the others through there. Again, this was based on this fleet of data from this population of vehicles that we were able to collect from different environments and different climates, zones, and different places where the vehicles go through different duty cycles. Some suburban, some very urban. I can say that we did not. These figures don't reflect the operating characteristics that you may have in for example, a national park setting, because it was a transit-related, public transportation-related database and a model for those kinds of agencies. We're hoping that some of the flexibility that this model will give you will be applicable for your fleets as well.
All right, one last question, and then we'll move on to the display of the Buffett model. It indicates that this person's done some research already on CNG versus diesel, and that there is some indication that there's no longer a significant difference in the emissions between CNG compared to the latest clean diesel. What is your opinion on this?
I would have to say that the new ultra-low sulfur diesel and the treatment equipment, after treatment equipment that is now put on a large heavy-duty buses make them pretty competitive from an air quality standpoint to CNG. That was not the case prior to the introduction of the ultra-low sulfur diesel. And just if you indulge me for a second, I mean what that new fuel did, and it was mandated for use on highway beginning in January, I'm going to say 2009. And it's not the sulfur. The sulfur went from 500 parts per million to 15 parts per million. It wasn't the sulfur itself that was the reduction of sulfur itself that was creating the better emissions profile. By reducing the sulfur, you could then put things like catalytic conversion technologies on the back end of the engine to clean up the NOx and clean up some of the other emissions, and that's why the reduction in the sulfur, it allows you to treat those emissions in a different way to clean up the profile of the bus. But I would agree that they look, compared to where the traditional diesel buses, if they're modern, if they're new, and they have these after treatment technologies on the engines, are much cleaner and are competitive with CNG.
Great, thank you, Steve. We're going to move on to the Buffett model, and Cicinio Conkas will be showing that to you. And before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that you might want to put your screen in full screen mode if you've not done that already, simply by clicking the bottom of the screen. There looks like a little box with 4 arrows. He will be doing a sharing of a file for Excel, and that will be the best way to view it. This document is available in the handouts section, along with instructions on how to utilize it. So, Cicinio?
Thank you, Amber. And Steve, I'm just trying to see, can you hear me? It's correct? Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Steve, for this overview of all these fuels. At this point, when we look at the sketch planning application, of course, you have in mind the following. Yes, we have collected all these data and information, several buses, a fleet of about 6,000 buses. But the sample size referred to heavy-duty buses running on different environments than probably your environment, where you're running your own buses, urban environment, therefore affecting fuel efficiency and affecting also overall emissions. So the question that you might have at this point, it probably has not been raised so far, is how this tool could be useful in our own setting. So what I will be showing next is an overview of the Buffett model that, yes, can be customized to your needs and answering those the question related to, given supply constraints, given the operating characteristics where we are, can we evaluate a set of alternative fuels on a cost-feasible framework? That is, can we look at our own existing fleet, and can we think of investing in a fleet that is composed of vehicles that function on these alternative fuels, and how cost efficient this decision could be? This is basically the big question that the sketch planning application tries to answer. And given our time constraints, we said that we were going to first show you the application and then run an application example. What we're going to do next is just work on a set of couple of examples directly on the Buffett model so that we can see the way it works, and then leave enough time for you to have all the questions that you might have at that point, and we're trying to answer them. When you open this sketch planning application, you'll see that it works under Microsoft Excel, and you have to have activated the so-called set of macros. The Buffett model works on the most recent version of Microsoft Excel, but is backward compatible with the previous versions, 2003 in particular. And Amber also prompted you that in the downloadables list, you have a little document that tells you how to activate these macros, which are security settings that allow to run applications with a lot of formulas within Excel itself. So basically, given that the Buffett model works within the Microsoft Excel platform, when you first open it up, and over here I'm just showing what you actually see when you run it, is this little welcome splash screen that gives the title of the program, the Buffett model. Then basically it reverts back to the an introduction worksheet. The layout is as simple as clicking a button over here called Run Analysis, and a prompt screen will load up. And hopefully, if you have set up your screen resolution at this point, you can see it on your screen. And at the very bottom of this screen, there is a set of buttons that allow you to go back and forth through these different steps. There are 7 steps in the analysis. In the very first screenshot, you see that you just enter some information relative to the analysis that you wish to conduct. So I'm going ahead, and as I'm explaining you this model, I'm going to run an example that hopefully relates to your employee expectation and an average case in general. I'm going to follow these steps and first enter information on this analysis that I just wish to run. Remember, overall, the purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to the model. We're not going to evaluate and help you right now at this point to make a decision on a particular fuel. This is not the objective of the webinar. We are just going to show you this tool that, if you then decide to go ahead and use it and properly customize it, then can actually become useful in a selection process of these alternative fuels. So I'm going to give a name to this agency. I'm going to keep in line with the theme of the presentation. So I'm going to call this agency Anywhere Refuge. And you can type in, and to move on, you can use your mouse or you can use the tab command on the keyboard. In this simple example, I'm interested in comparing as a baseline my current fleet of ULSD versus some alternative fuels, in particular compressed natural gas and diesel electric hybrid. So I'm going to just use the name of these fuels to run the comparison, and CNG and diesel hybrid. I'm going just to use my initials as the analyst running this example, and then it's today's date. It is relevant to enter the date because, as Steve mentioned previously, the default parameters of this model, cost parameters, operating costs, fuel costs for all the alternative fuels, and so forth, they were collected at a certain point in time, and Steve said about 24 months ago. So using and entering today's date allows putting those costs in today's dollars. So it's relevant to enter the point in time where you're running the analysis. Once I've completed this first screen, I'm just going to click on next and move on the selection of the alternative fuels that I wish to evaluate. In this example, I'm interested in evaluating CNG and also the ultra-low sulfur diesel hybrid electric. You can, if you wish, select other alternative fuels for evaluation, or at the bottom, click on Evaluate All Fuels. I'm going to move on the next screen. You will see that you're prompted to basically enter information on your current fleet composition. Of course, you enter the date 2011, and by default, we are assuming a bus life of 12 years. It doesn't mean that necessarily, and this model just works with the assumption that the bus life is on average 12 years. You can, and we will see in the next tab, you can change the default assumption of 12 years of bus life. But in this case, and as we see, the prompt screen that you get is, if you have a current fleet, it goes back to 1999, which is back in time in 12 years. Now, you can enter information on the right side about your future requisition schedule, what you're planning to buy. So I'm assuming, in this example, that we will be purchasing 10 new vehicles, and we're interested in evaluating, okay, what would the cost be, the cost comparison between ULSD, CNG, and hybrid electric working on ULSD. I'm entering 10 as a very small fleet acquisition schedule. I'm clicking next, and I move on step number 4 of the analysis. Some default parameters are presented and in front of you at this point, and they are related to the acquisition cost of the buses, the capital acquisition costs. We assume by default that in acquiring new buses, the federal government participate or puts in a share of the cost on per unit of each of the vehicles. The default value is 80%. Here in Florida, we have an 80% cost share, but it might be different in your case, and if so, on the right side, you just can enter your own custom value. So if the feds, they share a little bit more, you just enter an appropriate value, say 85 or 90%. We're assuming, and as I said before, a lifespan of 12 years when we look at this analysis. Because at the very end, we're going to produce a basic metric of comparison, which how much is going to cost us to run and purchase and run these buses on a per mile basis throughout the life of the bus. The default assumption is 12 years bus life. You can change it, you can reduce it depending on the type of vehicles that you're purchasing. We also have certain assumptions regarding on the usage of your buses. Here we have 51 and plus thousand miles. At this point you're wondering, wow, that's a whopping amount for us. We probably don't have any bus that runs on average, or any vehicle in our case, for so many miles during the course of the year. So I'm going to cut it down to it's a basic assumption of for these 10 vehicles of 5,000 miles per year. So I'm overriding the default values to customize the analysis to this example. Now, down the next cell, you see another default parameters relating to the assumption about the fueling facility life. Because remember that you are, in this case, comparing the acquisition of compressed natural gas buses. It could be the case that you don't have any storage facility in your premises. Therefore, if switching to this new alternative fuel fleet, you need to put in place storage facilities. And we're assuming a lifespan, given the analysis and the database upon which the model relies, a lifespan of 25 years. I'm going to leave this empty for the time being. Also, when it comes to evaluating other alternative fuels down on the hybrid vehicles battery replacement, we are assuming an average lifespan of batteries of 6 years. So every 6 years, basically, the battery comes to an end, and there is a cost for replacing these batteries. These values are 6 years average lifetime life for a battery, and a battery cost replacement of $31,000. I'm going to leave this empty for the moment, but remember that for your vehicles, it might be, the assumptions might be tweaked accordingly. This information can be obtained by the manufacturer that is providing the vehicles with, so that you can customize this information accordingly. I'm going to click on next to move on the step number 5 of the analysis. There's a lot of information over here, a lot of default values. These are related on the left side on the bus acquisition costs, which are basically the cost per of each one of the vehicles by fuel type. You have an average cost, for example, of ULSD bus of about $334,000. And for a heavy-duty bus, and then you have the CNG 386 and so forth on the left column. Each one of the default values over here can be customized, can be overridden by the user at any point in the analysis. You also have some information on capital costs related to fuel facility and other infrastructure costs. In the case of compressed natural gas, we have a fueling facility capital cost of about $2 million. This is information that we have collected, as you have seen in the first part of this webinar, on the 3,500 and plus CNG buses. To build a CNG facility, this is the average cost. You can set it to 0 if you already have a CNG fueling facility. So when you evaluate and compare the alternative fuels, okay, you say, hold on a second, we already built a CNG fueling facility. We are not going to incur in these costs any longer. So you can put it 0. In this case, though, because I'm running this simple example, I'm just assuming that we want to just put everything into the equation, that we're starting from scratch. We're moving to evaluate CNG as a first time ever. There are also some costs related to other capital that has to do with the fueling facility, not just the fueling facility itself. I'm going to click on the next step, step number 6 of the analysis, and we look at information that has to do with maintaining and operating the vehicles. Default values, they are in front of you. They are automatically loaded by the application. As Steve explained you, these are average labor and parts costs for each one of the alternative fuel vehicles. representative of half of the lifetime, because it's, of course, if you're looking at the new buses, they are probably covered by warranty, and therefore parts replacement are part of the warranty scheme. So you probably have very low at the very beginning of the life of each bus. You have a very low maintenance and part cost. These are representative of midlife of a bus. We're going to accept the default values as the values that are probably more representative for us for this example, but always remember that each of the cells in the green color represent an opportunity to customize the values. And of course, if your vehicle, you've given some historical information of similar vehicles that you have in your current fleet, provide you information on average labor and part replacement costs, you can override the default values. I'm leaving the cells empty, I'm accepting the default values, and I'm moving to step number 7 of the analysis, which deals with fuel efficiency factors and fuel cost factors for each one of the alternative fuels. The default value in terms of fuel efficiency is 3.96 miles per gallon for ultra-low sulfur diesel. As you can see, for example, when you move down to the hybrid ultra-low sulfur diesel, you have an average of 4.05 miles per gallon. So there is definitely hybrids are more efficient. There is also fuel efficiency for CNG. They're given to, I believe, series because of the energy content, and also the type of the representative sample that we have is the fuel efficiency is of 2.89 miles per gallon for the compressed natural gas buses. Now the fuel costs, that's the question. Oh, okay. Fuel costs, they tend to change quite rapidly, as we know when we go to the gas station. So that also applies for the agencies purchasing fuel. This information, the information on fuel costs, can be obtained by going to a specific website. Here we have a little question mark at the bottom right of step number 7 of the analysis. When I click on it, there is basically a splash screen that opens up, and it tells you the following. If you have to update the default values, if you have to update the alternative fuel costs, you have to click on the link below, which sends you to, if I click over here, basically sends me to a website, which is the alternative fuel price report. And the most recent update is that of October, the end of October of 2010, which reports the average fuel cost nationwide or by region in the United States for each one of these alternative fuels. And if you happen to use the model at a certain point in time where the most updated version of the clean fuel price report is available, you're really welcome to override the custom values. I'm going to accept these at the moment as the default values. I'm ready to click on finish and see what the result of my selection and my analysis is. So when I click on finish, immediately I'm sent to a worksheet tab. I'm going to just basically zoom in so that we can discuss the results in detail. As you can see, basically, at the top left, you have a summary of the information that you have entered on step number 1 of the analysis, and you have then results displayed for those fuels that you have selected. So specifically, you have results for ULSD, CNG, and ULSD, but the hybrid electric. The analysis is for a fleet size of 10 buses, and then we look at what really the gist of this analysis is all about. How much is going to cost us on a per mile basis throughout the life of these buses to actually purchase them? So which one is really more cost efficient? Now, Keep in mind the following, that when you get at this point, you have overcome already what is so-called a checklist. Are these fuels available near us? Are there any supply constraints? Are there any other environmental characteristics that prevent us from implementing this fuel? So before getting to this point, of course, you have done some preliminary analysis. So this is what we hope to as a tool that can be useful to you. When you get to this point, you have enough information to select a sub-list of all the alternative fuels that are out there. So as you can see, considering the information at the point in time in which you are running the analysis, therefore, the acceptance of the default values of the model, the current fuel costs, the current fuel efficiency assumptions for each of the alternative fuels, you have what is on an annualized cost basis the cost per mile for running this 10-bus fleet. You have over here, I'm going to scroll down and show you that, and probably zoom in. You probably on your screen you can see it quite well because I can see it on my laptop at this point. It's $7.65 per mile when it comes to ULSD bus versus $12.91 when you look at CNG bus. So it's quite a difference between CNG and ULSD. 7.65 versus 12.91. You say, wow, this is a big difference. Remember what we did at the very beginning. We were saying the following. I wish to compare the cost of acquiring ULSD versus CNG, but this is the very first time that we're making our mind up. So we don't have a fueling facility. We have to build a fueling facility. And I showed you that the average cost of a fueling facility is $2 million. Over the lifespan of these buses on an annualized cost basis, this reflects in a higher cost per mile of CNG versus ULSD. Then you look at the hybrid ULSD. The one factor over here that affects the cost of on a per mile basis of the hybrid bus operating under ULSD versus traditional ULSD is the cost of the bus itself. We have on average $544,000 versus $329,000. So it's a big difference. Remember that some economies of scale, of course, in terms of vehicles or purchasing and maintaining vehicles can be obtained if you were to buy a lot of these vehicles, but you're buying 10 vehicles overall, and you're going to drive them on average 5,000 miles per year. So keeping that in mind on a per mile basis, this is how much it's going to cost you when you look at the purchase of vehicles that are hybrid electric. You will see, and I'll show you in just a few seconds, basically what you can do to refine your analysis. At the very bottom, though, of this work tab, you have the other result on a per mile basis when you net out the contribution towards purchasing the bus that the federal government and we have gives to you. Basically, we have assumed that the feds, they share 80% of the cost of purchasing these vehicles. So if that is the case, then at the bottom you have this, the value that nets out the 80% contribution of the federal government. So on a per mile basis, you have $2.37 for ULSD versus $6.81 for CNG and $3.43 for the hybrid electric. So the hybrid electric is on a per mile basis a little bit more of a dollar more expensive than traditional ULSD. Now this is the comparison on in terms of costs. You are also interested in looking at the emission impacts due to the choice of these alternative fuels. Now, you click on at the bottom over here where it says View Emission Impacts, and another work tab opens up, which reports the emission impacts for these alternative fuels. Again, I'm zooming in so that everybody can see better. now at this point, I recollect the questions of some of the audience regarding emission factors as being affected by environmental conditions. The values that you have over here, the default values in terms of emission rates for carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons, and nitrogen oxides, and particular matter for the alternative fuels, including ULSD, these default values are average factors. That means that they are representative of average conditions. Of course, it would be ideal to customize the emission factors a little bit more and making them dependent upon altitude, for example, depending on other environmental conditions, ambient temperatures, and so forth. Yes, we have done that for another sketch planning application. Actually, I have produced a sketch planning model that fishes out from the Environmental Protection Agency. At that point, it was the mobile emission model, custom factors that take into account for ambient and altitude factors. That means that we're working on an update of this model, and hopefully we will have more detailed emission factors for this sketch planning application. But these are just averages. Now, it provides the worksheet tab provides you with a summary of impact emissions for CNG, ULSD, and hybrid electric working under ULSD fuel, and also gives you an incremental total annual cost per mile when it comes to basically taking into consideration the contribution that choosing an alternative fuel will have in terms of emission reductions on the environment. So we have another additional metric called total annual cost per mile, which includes the additional cost of related to emission pollutions to all users, or to all this, we call it as a society as a whole. I know Steve is prompting me with a question related to this evaluation. Steve?
Not a question, but just a comment. When we talked at the very beginning of the presentation about, what is it that you're trying to achieve through the implementation of an alternative fuel vehicle program, and I saw these numbers, and it reminded me of the very first foray I had into alternative fuels. When you look at the particulate matter, if you could scroll back down on the left number is diesel. The number on the right is CNG. My very first foray into this was introducing CNG buses into an airport application, and the problem that was trying to be solved was the soot on the canopy at the arrival and departure roadways. And so again, that was an application where, all things equal, this was a better alternative for that application in terms of what it was the decision makers were trying to deal with. I just want to interject.
Yes, thank you. So, this workup provides you with an emission impact estimation for this analysis. There is one other element that is relevant to the analysis. I'm going to switch back to the results of the cost comparison on a per mile basis. You have estimates which we define as just one number. How much it's going to cost on a per mile basis to run a bus with this alternative fuel and so forth. The question is, though, how reliable are these results, given that we know the following? We know that fuel costs are highly volatile. So we run the analysis at one point in time, and then you're saying, well, fuel costs might change in the near future, they might go up. How is this going to affect my decision-making process? So instead of presenting you with this just single point estimates, we thought of improving the application and providing you with ranges of results. So instead of seeing just the $7.65 or in the case of total annualized cost per mile, and just as a single point estimate, the question is, okay, what are the ranges? Is there a minimum? Is there a maximum in terms of how this number is affected by assumptions with respect to fuel efficiency, with respect to fuel costs, and all the other parameters? So we have an additional module in the Buffett model, which is called the sensitivity analysis. And by clicking, what happens, of course, you get first a warning, do you really you wish to continue this operation, because it's going to prompt you to a further step in the analysis. So basically, we take into consideration the following. We have obtained the fuel cost information from the Clean Fuel City report, which provides average of fuel price averages for the nation and for your region where you are located. And next, but the results are provided also in ranges in terms of a minimum and a maximum fuel cost on a per gallon basis. So we want to take into consideration expected prices changes in the near future and take them into consideration in our own analysis. So I'm going to click OK. What the model does at this point is running a so-called simulation. So it's taking the results and taking into account the volatility in fuel prices, so that at the very end reports the results of the fuel cost analysis in terms of ranges and provides you with a snapshot in terms of figures, histograms, so that you can better inform yourself in this decision-making process. Over here, after I've clicked on sensitivity analysis, the model runs a little simulation, then displays a set of figures. I'm going to zoom in and to explain you what basically happens over here. It takes the annualized cost per mile that takes into account in this case, the 80% federal component of vehicle purchase, so the contribution. The $2.37, in this case, these little figures over here is the range of values that we have for the ULSD fleet. So if we were to purchase these 10 vehicles, it's going to cost us $2.37 on average per mile to run them. But the cost of purchasing this fleet could be as low as $2.29 per mile, but as high as $2.46, depending on how fuel costs change in the near future. Because we take fuel volatility assumptions from the annual energy outlook from the Department of Energy, and we embed them in the model. So you have a little bit of a forecast of fuel prices in this Buffett application. Next, the other histogram looks at the average cost for the CNG fleet, and you can see it's $6.80 on average. But the cost of purchasing this fleet can be as low as $6.65 and as high as $7.13 per mile. So there's quite a bit of variation due to the volatility of CNG prices. When I'm looking at down at the other histograms that displays information on the ultra low sulfur diesel hybrid bus, and I'm going to zoom in to make it a little bit easier for you to look at it. The average cost is on a per mile basis $4.59 per mile, as low as $4.51, as high as $4.67. So depending on how you are making your decision, how risk averse you are in terms of switching to alternative fuels, you just want to take into consideration that on average you have a ballpark cost per mile. But we also have expected minimum and maximum ranges. We define them as a very high level of predictability, because these are defined as 95 confidence intervals. That is, if you were to purchase this fleet all over again and again and again, so on average, this is the cost that you would face with minimum and maximum ranges. the sensitivity analysis is used to corroborate the results and take into consideration that the default parameters are subject to variation, in particular the fuel costs. Now, we have run the simulation, we have obtained the results, and then you say, okay, this is a very interesting exercise. We have evaluated this 10th fleet and so forth, but we need to probably fine-tune the analysis, and you wish to go back and rerun the analysis and maybe tweak some of your assumptions. All you have to do is basically go back to the result work tab, and again, I'm going to zoom in to make it easier for you. Just go back to the very beginning of the evaluation, and you run the analysis. As you see, it loads up and displays the information as you first entered it in there. And now you can refine your analysis. For example, if I were to rerun the analysis, I would say the following. And there is no time to do it, but like one example, Steve, could be, for example, a very interesting one is that, okay, maybe we already have a CNG facility fueling in place. So you can go immediately and say, okay, now when it comes to the capital cost side, instead of paying $2 million over here for the fueling facility, I'm going to put a 0 because we already have it, basically. So we don't need to build another one. I'm going to immediately click on finish and then display the results and show you what happens to the analysis. Now you can see immediately how low it goes on an annualized per mile basis, the comparison between ultra low sulfur diesel and CNG. $1.18 versus $1.24 on a per mile basis. So you see that the analysis can be tweaked, can be tailored to your needs. I know that we have, Amber, correctly, probably 10 minutes left, and we are eager to get some questions from you or get some feedback. That would be great.
Great, thank you, Cecinio. All right, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A drop-down manager. I wanted to remind everybody that this PowerPoint presentation, as well as the Buffett model, and even more importantly, the instructions on how to use the Buffett model, are downloadable from the handouts button in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Also in the handouts section is a great resource from Volpe. The John A. Volpe National Transportation Systems Center has a guide that we've provided for you up there entitled The Alternative Fuel Guidelines for Alternative Transportation Systems, as well as an Excel spreadsheet file that provides you additional information as to what parks are utilizing which alternative fuels and some contact information. All right, so our first question is going to be for Steve, and that is the data that you reflected in your presentation indicates large 40-foot urban buses for operation. Can you make some comment about smaller fleets, lighter duties for FLMA operations?
That's an excellent question, and I was sure that we were going to get it. And the reason we are presenting this today was actually on, I guess, in response to a request that we had gotten from one of the national park folks. And this model, because as I said in the beginning, was funded by a grant under the National Center for Transit Research. It does heavily depend on data from 40-foot buses. That said, when you start thinking about lighter duty vehicles, and we're actually pitching the Florida DOT to perhaps allow us the latitude to develop a database for a fleet of lighter duty vehicles, because we get this question not just for people engaged in federal lands and parks, but also for the provision of paratransit services. We are in fact collecting data. Obviously the acquisition cost differential isn't as big when you get into the lighter duty vehicles. We don't know that much because we're just beginning to collect data on the operating cost differentials for the smaller buses or cutaways or so again, while for some of you this may be very appropriate because you're interested in looking at the heavy duty vehicles, I would say the model could certainly is robust enough that if you had the data, you could put it in there. But the beauty of this is to get all that operating costs history that frankly isn't really appropriate to a lighter duty vehicle. They're much less expensive to operate than the very large buses.
Thank you, Steve. All right, and it looks like we have one more question, possibly for Cicineo. Does this analysis account for an operation where federal dollar funds are differing shares of operational expenses and maintenance expenses?
That's a very good question. When it comes to the share of maintenance costs, the model allows for the customization of the capital acquisition costs, the basis. So far, the assumption is that 100% of the maintenance costs are covered by the agency. Tweaking the model to account for sharing of the maintenance and other type of variable costs is not hard at all. It can be done. It's just an extension, a minor extension to the model. So far, though, this application looks at the sharing of the capital acquisition cost component.
Great, thank you. That actually looks like all of the questions for us right now. I wanted to just remind everybody that all of this information that we've presented today can be downloaded from the handout section of the website or of the live meeting, and I also wanted to mention that you can visit the triptech.org website in order to download the Volpe documents that I referenced earlier, or you can download them from the live meeting. I'm going to leave you today at the TripTech website, and if you are interested in learning more information about it, you can certainly visit it. For those of you who had additional questions about altitude and as it relates to alternative fuels, you can email the help desk for additional information. We certainly welcome the opportunity to help you in any way we can. I want to thank you all for joining us today for the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit in the Parks Technical Assistance Center. I want to thank our esteemed presenters, Cicineo Conkas and Steve Reich. Thank you very much, and we look forward to having all of you participate in our next webinar. Again, we're going to leave you with the TripTech website. Please feel free to browse around and view any resources or information that you might find valuable. Later on today, you will be receiving an email that will be an evaluation of today's events, and we'd like your feedback so that we can help improve our presentation moving forward. This session is being recorded and will be available sometime in the coming weeks on the TripTech website as well. We will in the future be offering a grant writing training webinar. If you're on our distribution list, you'll receive notification of the date of those trainings, and we look forward to having you there. If you are not a member, we encourage you to sign up using the TripTech website that we've provided for you up here. Again, thank you so much and have a fantastic afternoon.